The officiant's voice echoed through the grand but empty chapel, his words formal and unyielding, cutting through the stillness like a blade. Do you, Jayden Williams, take Evelyn Walker to be your lawfully wedded wife? Jayden froze. For a fleeting moment, he stared at Evelyn, a woman old enough to be his grandmother, standing across from him with a calm, almost regal demeanor. Her silver hair gleamed under the dim light, her piercing eyes fixed on him as if daring him to waver. This wasn't a wedding, it was a transaction. A week ago, Jayden had been nothing more than a struggling law student, scraping by on a part-time server's wage, haunted by overdue bills and the despair on his mother's face. Now here he was, bound to a decision that could either save his family or destroy his own sense of self. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in on him, silent and suffocating. I I do, Jayden said finally, his voice firm despite the chaos roaring inside him. The officiant nodded and turned to Evelyn. And do you, Evelyn Walker, take Jayden Williams to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Evelyn said without hesitation, her voice clear and steady. Her confidence felt like a knife twisting in his gut. The ceremony lasted only minutes. The applause from the small group of witnesses was polite but dissonant, their expressions ranging from bemused curiosity to outright judgment. The sheer absurdity of the scene wasn't lost on Jayden, a 75-year-old billionaire widow marrying a 25-year-old student. As the officiant handed them the marriage certificate to sign, Jayden's fingers trembled slightly. Evelyn leaned closer to him, her voice low but firm. This will change your life, Jayden. You'll see. Jayden nodded wordlessly, feeling a wave of nausea rise in his chest. Stepping outside, the crisp evening air hit him like a slap. The sprawling estate stretched out before him, its manicured lawns glowing under the golden hues of a setting sun. The vastness of it all was suffocating, a stark contrast to the cramped apartment he had called home just days ago. He paused on the chapel steps, his thoughts racing. He could almost hear his mother's voice, gentle, exhausted, but full of love. You don't have to do this, she had told him the night he shared Evelyn's proposition. I don't have a choice, he'd replied, his voice cracking under the weight of his desperation. It wasn't for himself. It was for her, for Elijah. His 14-year-old brother deserved better than the life they were barely clinging to. His mother deserved more than pain, illness, and endless sacrifices. This is for them, Jayden muttered under his breath, clenching his fist so hard his nails bit into his palms. He turned back to glance at the towering estate behind him, its grandeur both awe-inspiring and oppressive. It wasn't just a new chapter of his life, it was a new world. But at what cost? Jayden Williams trudged up the cracked steps of the apartment building he called home. His worn backpack hung heavily on his shoulders, stuffed with law school textbooks he barely had time to read. Each step felt like a mountain, but the weight wasn't just physical. It was the crushing responsibility of keeping his family afloat. Inside, the small apartment was dimly lit, the faint aroma of rice and canned vegetables wafted from the kitchen. His 14-year-old brother, Elijah, sat at the cluttered table, furiously scribbling on a math worksheet. You're late again, Elijah said without looking up. Jayden dropped his bag near the door and forced a smile. Yeah, Eli. Work ran long. How's the homework going? Elijah grinned proudly. Almost done. Easy stuff. Jayden ruffled his brother's hair as he walked to the kitchen, where his mother Loretta was preparing dinner. Her movements were slow, her frail frame a stark reminder of the toll diabetes had taken on her over the years. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a bowl on the counter. Ma, you okay? Jayden asked, concern lacing his voice. Loretta brushed him off with a weak smile. I'm fine, baby, just tired. Jayden knew better. The endless pile of medical bills on the counter told the real story. She wasn't fine, and he wasn't doing enough to fix it. They sat down to dinner, 3 chairs around a rickety table that felt too big for the small family it held. Elijah chatted about school, his youthful optimism a rare source of light in their home. Jayden nodded and smiled, but his mind was elsewhere. After dinner, once Elijah was in bed, Jayden sat alone at the table. He stared at the stack of overdue bills, his chest tight. His part-time job barely covered groceries and rent, let alone the medications and treatments Loretta needed. He thought of his father, Marcus, who had died suddenly a year ago. Marcus had been their rock, a truck driver who worked long hours to ensure his family never went without. His death had left a hole Jayden couldn't fill, no matter how hard he tried. Jayden ran a hand through his short-cropped hair and sighed. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was a message from Jordan, a co-worker at the diner. "Hey man, are you coming to that fundraiser I mentioned? It's this Saturday. Free food and drinks. Good for networking." Jayden frowned. Networking wasn't exactly on his list of priorities. He typed back a quick response. "Not sure. Got a lot going on." Jordan's reply came almost immediately. "You should come. Trust me, you'll want to meet the people there. It could open some doors." Jayden set the phone down, skeptical. A fancy fundraiser filled with rich people wasn't his scene. What could he possibly gain from mingling with them? Still, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "What if this is an opportunity?" The next day passed in a blur of classes and work. By the time Jayden got home, the idea of the fundraiser had slipped to the back of his mind. But at dinner, Elijah brought it up. "You should go," Elijah said, his eyes wide with excitement. "You're always saying you need connections to make it as a lawyer. This could be your chance." Jayden sighed. "I don't even have anything to wear." "I can help with that," Loretta said, her voice firmer than usual. She placed a hand on Jayden's arm. "You've worked so hard for this family. If there's even a small chance this event could help, you should go." Jayden looked at his mother, her face pale but resolute. She was right, but that didn't make it easier. He nodded reluctantly. "All right, I'll go." That night, Jayden borrowed a suit from their neighbor, Mr. Harris, who had once worked in sales. The jacket was a little big, and the pants were slightly short, but it would have to do. As Saturday approached, Jayden felt a growing sense of unease. The thought of stepping into a world so far removed from his own made his stomach churn. But deep down he hoped, no, he needed, this event to lead to something. When Saturday evening arrived, Jayden stood outside the grand estate where the fundraiser was being held. Towering iron gates stretched before him, a stark contrast to the crumbling sidewalks of his neighborhood. Beyond the gates, manicured lawns and a stately mansion glowed warmly under the evening sky. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, their polished exteriors gleaming like jewels. Jayden adjusted the borrowed suit jacket and took a deep breath. The weight of his family's struggles pressed on his chest like a stone. He was doing this for them. A valet approached, offering to take his worn leather bag. Jayden shook his head. It was the only piece of himself he felt comfortable bringing into this world of opulence. Inside, the mansion was a spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over marble floors, and the air buzzed with polite conversation. Jayden hesitated in the grand foyer, feeling like every pair of eyes in the room was on him. His gaze darted around, searching for Jordan. Instead, he caught snippets of conversation, politics, investments, weekend getaways to Europe. He felt a pang of alienation. This wasn't his world, and he doubted it ever would be. Before he could retreat, a calm, confident voice interrupted his thoughts. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." Jayden turned to see an elderly woman standing beside him. Her silver hair was styled elegantly, and her navy blue dress shimmered subtly under the chandelier light. She held a champagne flute in one hand and rested the other lightly on a carved cane. Jayden stammered, caught off guard. The woman smiled gently. "It's different, isn't it?" Jayden nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Overwhelming, to be honest." She chuckled softly. "I understand. Why don't we sit and talk for a while?" Jayden followed the woman to a quieter corner of the room, her presence both calming and commanding. The noise of the bustling fundraiser seemed to fade as they sat in a pair of plush armchairs near a tall window. Outside, the sprawling lawns of the estate stretched into the darkness, the faint glow of garden lights illuminating the scene. "I'm Evelyn Walker," the woman said, extending her hand. Jayden hesitated for a moment before shaking it. "Jayden Williams. Nice to meet you, ma'am." "Tell me, Jayden," Evelyn said, studying him with a curious glint in her eyes. "What brings you here tonight? You don't strike me as a regular at events like these." Jayden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm not," he admitted. "A coworker invited me. Said it might be good for networking. A wise coworker, Evelyn said with a faint smile. Networking is the lifeblood of events like this, but it's also easy to get lost in the crowd. Jayden glanced around the room, noting how the other guests moved effortlessly from one conversation to the next. Their laughter was light, their words polished. He felt like an outsider looking in. I'm starting to see that, he muttered. Evelyn gestured toward the glass of champagne she'd set on the table between them. What do you do, Jayden? She asked. Or rather, what do you want to do? Jayden hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But something about Evelyn's demeanor made him feel safe, as if she genuinely wanted to hear what he had to say. I'm a law student, he began slowly. I want to become a lawyer, fight for people who don't have a voice. But it's hard. My mom's sick, and my little brother's still in school. After my dad passed, he trailed off, the words catching in his throat. Evelyn's expression softened. That's a heavy burden to carry, she said after a moment. And yet, here you are, doing everything you can to keep moving forward. That takes strength. Jayden shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. It's not like I have a choice, he said quietly. If I don't do it, no one else will. Evelyn tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. That kind of determination is rare, Jayden, she said, and it's exactly what people like you need to succeed. Their conversation continued, flowing naturally despite the differences in their backgrounds. Jayden found himself opening up about the challenges he faced, not just the financial struggles, but the subtle racism he encountered daily. He spoke of professors who doubted his abilities, classmates who excluded him, and the constant pressure to prove himself in a world that seemed determined to hold him back. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully as he spoke. I know what it's like to feel out of place, she said, but don't let that stop you. The world needs people like you, people who are willing to fight for what's right, no matter the odds. Jayden was struck by the sincerity in her voice. For the first time that evening, he felt like someone truly saw him, not as a struggling student or a token attendee, but as a person with potential. As the night wore on, Evelyn shared bits of her own story. She spoke of her late husband, a philanthropist who had believed in using their wealth to make a difference. After his death, she had dedicated her life to continuing his work, focusing on helping marginalized communities. I've met so many brilliant, capable people over the years, Evelyn said, her gaze distant for a moment. But not all of them had the opportunities they deserved. That's why I do what I do, to level the playing field, even just a little. Jayden nodded, deeply moved by her words. He had never expected to find such a kindred spirit in someone like Evelyn. As the evening came to an end, Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. Jayden, it's been a pleasure talking with you, she said. I hope this won't be the last time we meet. Jayden hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that too, he said, surprised by how much he meant it. Evelyn smiled, her eyes warm. Good. Take care of yourself, Jayden. And remember, you're stronger than you think. As Jayden left the mansion that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had been more than just a chance meeting. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Jayden Williams' small apartment, waking him far earlier than he had planned. He groaned, his body still heavy from the exhaustion of juggling work, school, and the lingering weight of last night's conversation with Evelyn Walker. Her words had stayed with him, quietly resonating in a way that felt almost unsettling. It was rare for anyone to believe in him so openly, let alone a stranger from such a different world. As he shuffled to the kitchen, his phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, he swiped to answer. Hello? Jayden, this is Evelyn Walker, came the familiar, measured voice. Jayden blinked, startled. He had half expected their meeting at the fundraiser to end without a follow-up. Oh, good morning, Mrs. Walker. I didn't think I'd hear from you again. Evelyn chuckled softly. I hope you don't mind me calling. I enjoyed our conversation last night and couldn't stop thinking about what you shared. Are you free to meet today? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Jayden hesitated, a million thoughts racing through his mind. Why was she reaching out to him? What could she possibly want to discuss? Still, curiosity got the better of him. Sure, I can make time, he said cautiously. Where should I go? My home, Evelyn said, her tone warm but firm. I'll have my driver pick you up. Does 2 o'clock work? Yeah, that works, Jayden replied, trying to mask the anxiety creeping into his voice. Perfect. I'll see you then, Evelyn said before ending the call. Jayden stared at the phone, the knot of uncertainty tightening in his stomach. At exactly 2 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside his apartment building. The driver, a polite man in a tailored suit, stepped out and opened the door for Jayden. The ride through the city was smoother than anything Jayden had experienced before, the luxury of it all making him feel even more out of place. When they arrived at Evelyn's estate, Jayden was struck again by its grandeur. The towering gates and sprawling lawns were as imposing as he remembered. This time, however, they carried a sense of foreboding. The driver escorted him to the front door, where a butler greeted him and led him inside. Evelyn was waiting in a sunlit sitting room, seated in a plush armchair. A tray of tea and delicate pastries sat on the table before her. She looked up as Jayden entered, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. Jayden, I'm glad you could make it, she said, gesturing for him to sit in the chair opposite her. Thank you for inviting me, Jayden replied, his voice careful but polite. For a few moments they exchanged pleasantries. Evelyn asked about his family, his classes, and his work. Her questions were thoughtful, and she listened intently to his answers. But Jayden could sense there was more she wanted to say. Finally, Evelyn set her teacup down and folded her hands in her lap. Her expression grew serious. Jayden, I want to share something with you, she began. It's personal, but I think you'll understand why I'm telling you. Jayden leaned forward slightly, his curiosity piqued. You see, she continued, her voice soft, I haven't always been the woman you see today. Many years ago, I was caught in a life that revolved around power and wealth, blind to the struggles of others. That changed one night when a young black man saved my life. Jayden blinked, surprised. Saved your life? Evelyn nodded. I was walking home late when a man tried to rob me. He had a knife, and I was frozen with fear. This young man happened to be passing by and intervened. He fought the attacker off and stayed with me until I was safe. I never even got his name. But that moment changed everything for me. It opened my eyes to the disparities in our world. She paused, her gaze distant for a moment. From that night on, I vowed to use my privilege and resources to help others, especially those who've been marginalized. It became my life's mission. Jayden listened intently, the story striking a chord within him. That's incredible, he said, unsure of what else to say. Evelyn smiled faintly. Thank you. And that brings me to why I asked you here today. Jayden straightened in his seat, his heart quickening. I see something in you, Jayden, she said, something rare. You remind me of that young man who saved me all those years ago. Your determination, your strength, your heart. These are qualities the world desperately needs. Jayden felt his cheeks flush. I'm just trying to get by, he said, embarrassed. And yet, you do so with dignity and resilience, Evelyn replied. That's why I want to make you an offer. The room seemed to grow quieter as she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with his. Jayden, she said, her voice steady, I'm dying. I have a terminal illness, and the doctors say I have less than a year left. Jayden's breath caught. He had suspected her frailty, but hadn't imagined it was this serious. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn waved a hand gently. Don't be. I've made peace with it. But before I go, I want to ensure that my legacy lives on. My foundation, my resources. They need someone with vision and integrity to guide them. Someone like you. Jayden stared at her, stunned. I don't understand. What are you saying? Evelyn's expression remained calm. I want you to marry me, she said matter-of-factly. The words hung in the air, surreal and incomprehensible. Marry you? Jayden repeated, certain he had misheard. Yes, Evelyn said, her tone unwavering. It's not about romance or tradition. It's a partnership. I want to legally transfer my estate and foundation to you, and this is the simplest way to do it. Jayden's mind raced, the absurdity of the idea clashing with the gravity of her words. Mrs. Walker, I don't think I can. I understand your hesitation, Evelyn said gently, but think of what this could mean for your family. Your mother could get the care she needs. Your brother could go to the best schools, and you could use my resources to make real change in the world. Jayden felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. It was an impossible choice, one that could save his family but at the cost of his pride and sense of normalcy. "Can I think about it?" he asked finally. "Of course," Evelyn said with a nod. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Jayden, opportunities like this don't come often. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most profound changes." The days following Evelyn Walker's shocking proposal passed in a blur for Jayden Williams. He went through the motions of his life, walking to work, attending classes, and sitting at the kitchen table with his family, all while her words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most profound changes. Each night, Jayden lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of his room, wrestling with the implications of her offer. On one hand, marrying a woman 50 years his senior felt absurd, even transactional. On the other hand, it was a lifeline, a way to save his family from the crushing weight of debt, illness, and despair. But the choice wasn't simple. What would people think? Would he lose the last shred of pride he had left? At dinner one evening, his mother, Loretta, noticed his distraction. She reached across the table, her frail hand covering his. "What's on your mind, baby?" she asked softly. Jayden hesitated, unsure how to share the truth. Finally, he exhaled deeply. "I got an unusual offer," he began, carefully avoiding her eyes. "A woman wants me to marry her. She's older, a lot older, but she says she can help us, pay for your treatment, send Elijah to a good school, get us out of this hole." Loretta's brows furrowed in confusion, but she didn't interrupt. Jayden continued, explaining Evelyn's circumstances, her terminal illness, and her foundation. By the time he finished, Loretta's expression was a mixture of shock and sadness. "Jayden," she said slowly, "that's a lot to take in." "I know," he admitted, his voice strained. "It feels wrong, Ma, like I'm selling myself or something. But at the same time," he trailed off, shaking his head, "I don't see another way. We're drowning here." Loretta sat in silence for a long moment, her gaze distant. Finally, she looked at him with a mixture of love and determination. "Baby, you've been carrying this family on your back for too long. If this woman sees something in you and wants to help, maybe it's not about what's right or wrong. Maybe it's about what you can do with the opportunity." Jayden blinked, surprised by her response. "You think I should do it?" "I think," Loretta said, her voice firm despite her frailty, "that you're a good man. And sometimes good men have to make tough choices for the people they love." Her words lingered with him long after she went to bed. Jayden thought about Elijah, who was still young enough to dream big but old enough to understand the weight of their struggles. He thought about his mother, who pretended to be stronger than she was because she didn't want to burden him. And he thought about himself, a man who had spent so much time fighting for survival that he had forgotten what hope felt like. 2 days later, Jayden found himself standing outside Evelyn's estate once more. His heart pounded as he rang the doorbell. The same butler from before led him to the sunlit sitting room where Evelyn waited. She greeted him with a warm smile, though her sharp eyes searched his face for an answer. "Jayden," she said, gesturing for him to sit, "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I've been thinking," he said, sitting down, "about your offer." "And?" Evelyn asked, her tone calm but curious. Jayden took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. "I'll do it," he said finally. "I'll marry you." Evelyn's smile softened, and for a moment, Jayden thought he saw relief flash across her face. "You've made a brave decision, Jayden," she said. "I promise you won't regret it." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Evelyn moved quickly, arranging for a private ceremony with only a handful of witnesses. Jayden signed the necessary legal documents, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in his own life. He avoided looking at his reflection in the mirror when he tried on his suit, unable to reconcile the man he saw with the choices he was making. The day of the wedding arrived with little fanfare. It was held in a small chapel on Evelyn's estate, with only her lawyer, a few staff members, and Jayden's mother and brother in attendance. Loretta, dressed in her best church outfit, gave Jayden a reassuring smile as he walked down the aisle. Elijah, sitting beside her, looked both confused and awed by the grandeur of the setting. Evelyn stood at the altar, her navy blue dress elegant yet understated. She held her cane lightly, her posture as dignified as ever. When Jayden took his place beside her, she looked up at him with a calm, steady gaze. The ceremony was brief and formal. The officiant spoke in soft, measured tones, and the vows were recited without flourish. Jayden's voice faltered slightly when he said, "I do." But he forced himself to meet Evelyn's eyes, drawing strength from her unwavering expression. When it was over, the witnesses clapped politely, and Evelyn placed a hand on Jayden's arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying an emotion he couldn't quite place, "for trusting me." After the ceremony, there was a small reception in the estate's dining room. Jayden sat with his mother and brother, trying to process the surreal reality of what had just happened. Evelyn mingled with the few guests, her composure unshaken. Later that evening, Evelyn called Jayden into her study. It was a grand room filled with shelves of leather-bound books and a large oak desk. She gestured for him to sit across from her. "Now that we're officially partners," she began, "there are a few things I'd like to discuss." Jayden nodded, unsure of what to expect. "First," Evelyn said, "I want you to familiarize yourself with the foundation. It's the heart of everything I've built, and I want you to understand its mission and impact. You'll meet the team and visit some of our projects in the coming weeks." Jayden listened intently, surprised by how methodical and practical Evelyn was. She wasn't treating him like a placeholder or a pawn. She was preparing him to take on real responsibility. "Second," she continued, her tone softening, "I want you to feel at home here. This estate is as much yours now as it is mine. I know this arrangement is unconventional, but I hope you'll come to see it as a partnership, not just an obligation." Jayden didn't know how to respond. The weight of what he had agreed to was only beginning to sink in. But as he looked at Evelyn, this formidable, compassionate woman who had chosen to entrust him with her legacy, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. "I'll do my best," he said finally, his voice steady. Evelyn smiled. "That's all I ask." The morning of the wedding was quiet, almost eerily so. Jayden Williams sat in his small room in Evelyn Walker's sprawling estate, staring at the suit laid out on the bed. It was custom-tailored, the finest thing he'd ever owned, but it felt more like a costume than clothing. He buttoned the shirt with slow, deliberate movements, his mind racing. Today wasn't about love or celebration. It was about obligation, survival, and sacrifice. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest. When Jayden walked into the chapel, the quiet hum of polite conversation stopped. He felt the eyes of the small gathering on him: Evelyn's lawyer, a handful of estate staff, and, most importantly, his mother and brother sitting in the front row. Loretta's face was a mixture of pride and sadness. Dressed in her Sunday best, she gave Jayden a small, reassuring nod. Beside her, Elijah fidgeted, his young face alight with curiosity and confusion. Evelyn stood at the altar, a picture of calm and composure. Her navy blue dress was simple but elegant, complementing the silver streaks in her neatly styled hair. She held her cane lightly, her posture as dignified as ever. Jayden approached the altar, each step feeling heavier than the last. Evelyn turned to him and offered a soft, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that carried no judgment, only understanding. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice steady and deliberate. "We are gathered here today to join Evelyn Walker and Jayden Williams in marriage." Jayden barely heard the words. His mind kept drifting to his family, his mother's hospital bills, Elijah's education, their small apartment. This was for them, he reminded himself. This was the only way. The officiant turned to Jayden. "Do you, Jayden Williams, take Evelyn Walker to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" Jayden hesitated for a fraction of a second, his heart pounding. Then he swallowed hard and forced the words out. "I do." The officiant turned to Evelyn. "And do you, Evelyn Walker, take Jayden Williams to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" Evelyn's voice was steady, her expression serene. "I do. With the exchange of these vows, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may seal your union with a kiss." Jayden froze. He hadn't thought about this part. Evelyn, ever composed, leaned in and gave him a brief, respectful kiss on the cheek. The gesture was devoid of romance but filled with meaning. It was an acknowledgement of their partnership, not a traditional marriage. The small crowd applauded politely, and the ceremony was over. Afterward, they gathered in the estate's grand dining room for a modest reception. A simple cake sat on the table, surrounded by a few trays of hors d'oeuvres. Jayden sat with his mother and brother, his thoughts too tangled to focus on the conversations around him. "You okay, baby?" Loretta asked gently, placing a hand on his arm. Jayden forced a smile. "Yeah, Ma, just a lot to process." Loretta nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'm proud of you, Jayden. You're doing what you need to do for this family. That takes courage." Elijah leaned in, his voice hushed. "So, you're like married now? Does that mean we're rich?" Jayden chuckled softly, ruffling Elijah's hair. "It's not that simple, Eli, but things are going to get better." Across the room, Evelyn mingled with the few guests. She moved slowly, her cane tapping lightly against the floor, but her presence was commanding. When their eyes met, she gave Jayden a small nod. Later that evening, Evelyn summoned Jayden to her study. The room was grand, with towering bookshelves and antique furniture that seemed to hum with history. A decanter of amber liquid sat on the desk, alongside two crystal glasses. "Come in," Evelyn said, gesturing for Jayden to sit across from her. She poured a small amount of the liquid into each glass and slid one toward him. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Jayden hesitated, then lifted his glass and took a sip. The drink was strong and smooth, warming him from the inside out. "Now that we're officially partners," Evelyn began, folding her hands on the desk, "it's time to discuss what comes next." Jayden nodded, trying to mask his unease. "First," she said, "I want you to take some time to familiarize yourself with the foundation. It's not just about money, Jayden. It's about people. I want you to understand our mission and the impact we've had." "I can do that," Jayden said, his voice steady. "Good," Evelyn said with a faint smile. "Second, I want you to feel at home here. This estate is as much yours now as it is mine. I know this arrangement is unconventional, but I hope, in time, you'll see it as more than just an obligation." Jayden shifted in his seat. "I appreciate that," he said. Evelyn studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce through his uncertainty. "I chose you, Jayden, because I see something in you. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who changed my life. I hope you'll come to understand why I made this decision." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jayden didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. As the night wore on, Jayden returned to his room. He lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ornate ceiling. The events of the day replayed in his mind. The vows, the reception, Evelyn's words. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, peering into an uncertain future. The road ahead was uncharted, filled with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. Scene 7. The Weight of Responsibility, 1,200 words. Jayden woke up in his new bedroom, the first rays of morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The bed beneath him was soft, the sheets luxurious, but he hadn't slept well. The sheer size of the room made him feel out of place, as if he didn't belong in a life this grand. He sat on the edge of the bed staring at his hands. Everything had changed, but he still felt like the same person, just a young man struggling to carry the weight of his family's survival. He wasn't sure how to reconcile that with this new life, where polished floors and antique furniture surrounded him. Evelyn had told him to join her for breakfast in the main dining hall. When he arrived, he found her already seated at the long table, sipping tea. Despite the elegance of the setting, Evelyn was dressed simply, her demeanor calm but commanding. "Good morning, Jayden," she said, her tone warm. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," he lied, pulling out a chair across from her. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her sharp gaze cutting through his facade. "You'll get used to it," she said. "This life takes adjustment, but it's worth the discomfort. You'll see that soon enough." Jayden nodded but remained quiet. A server placed a plate of food in front of him, eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. It was more elaborate than anything he'd had in months, but his appetite was muted by the swirl of thoughts in his head. "You'll need your energy," Evelyn continued. "Today, I'll be introducing you to the foundation. It's the heart of everything I've built, and soon it will be your responsibility to carry it forward. Jayden set down his fork. Why did you choose me? He asked. Evelyn tilted her head, studying him. I told you before, you remind me of someone I once knew. But it's more than that. You're not just smart, Jayden. You're resilient. You understand struggle in a way most people in my world never will. That gives you a unique perspective, one this foundation needs. Her words landed heavily. Jayden wanted to believe her, but he couldn't shake the nagging voice in his head that whispered he wasn't ready for this. After breakfast, Evelyn's assistant Clara joined them in the estate's library. She handed Jayden a thick binder labeled Foundation Overview. This contains everything you'll need to know to get started, Clara said, her tone professional but not unkind. Evelyn has outlined the Foundation's history, current projects, and key personnel. Evelyn gestured for Jayden to open the binder. As he flipped through the pages, he saw lists of initiatives, budgets, and mission statements. The Foundation's reach was staggering, supporting everything from after-school programs to community health clinics. It's a lot, Jayden admitted, feeling overwhelmed. It is, Evelyn agreed, her tone firm but encouraging. But you don't have to learn it all at once. Start by understanding the mission. This foundation exists to create opportunities for those who've been overlooked by society. Everything else flows from that. Clara handed Jayden a tablet. You'll also find digital files and records here. Tomorrow you'll start meeting with department heads and visiting some of our projects in person. Jayden nodded, his mind reeling from the sheer scale of the responsibility he was being handed. The first meeting was with the head of the Foundation's educational programs, a middle-aged man named Victor. He was friendly but skeptical, his handshake firm but his smile cautious. I'll be honest, Victor said as they sat in a conference room. When Evelyn told us about this transition, I had my doubts. But she believes in you, and that counts for a lot. Jayden appreciated the honesty, even if it stung. I know I have a lot to prove, as he said, but I'm here to learn and to help. Victor nodded. Good. The educational programs are one of our biggest focuses. We fund scholarships, after-school programs, and teacher training in underserved communities. It's made a huge difference, but there's always more to do. Jayden took notes as Victor outlined their challenges and successes. By the end of the meeting, he felt slightly less like an imposter and more like someone who could eventually make a difference. The next few days were a whirlwind. Jayden met with the heads of various departments, learning about the Foundation's work in housing, healthcare, and workforce development. Each conversation added a layer of understanding, but it also revealed the immense scope of the responsibility he had taken on. Evelyn accompanied him to some of the meetings, her presence both comforting and intimidating. She was sharp and direct, offering insights that revealed the depth of her experience. At one point during a break between meetings, Evelyn turned to Jayden. How are you holding up? She asked. Jayden hesitated. It's a lot, he admitted. I don't want to let you down. Evelyn smiled faintly. You won't. You're capable of more than you realize. Just keep showing up, and you'll find your footing. One afternoon, Evelyn took Jayden to visit a women's shelter the Foundation supported. It was located in a struggling part of the city, a stark contrast to the luxury of Evelyn's estate. Inside, they were greeted warmly by the shelter's director, a woman named Gloria. She led them on a tour, explaining how the shelter provided housing, counseling, and job training for women escaping domestic abuse. Jayden was struck by the resilience of the women he met. One woman, Maria, shared her story of fleeing an abusive relationship with her 2 children. This shelter saved my life, Maria said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. And now I'm working here, helping other women rebuild their lives. Jayden felt a lump rise in his throat. The work being done here wasn't just meaningful, it was transformative. As they left the shelter, Jayden turned to Evelyn. This is incredible, he said. Evelyn nodded, her expression thoughtful. This is why I chose you, Jayden. You have the heart to see the people behind the programs. Never lose that. That evening, Jayden sat in his room, poring over the binder and tablet Clara had given him. The numbers were daunting, the goals ambitious. But as he reflected on what he had seen at the shelter, he felt a flicker of resolve. This wasn't just about fulfilling Evelyn's expectations or proving himself to the Foundation staff. It was about the people whose lives depended on this work. For the first time since the wedding, Jayden felt a glimmer of purpose. The days passed in a blur as Jayden worked tirelessly to learn every detail about the foundation. Each project meeting, each site visit added to his growing sense of purpose. But underneath it all, Jayden couldn't ignore the subtle but undeniable signs of Evelyn's declining health. She moved slower, leaned more heavily on her cane, and her voice, though sharp and commanding, often faltered under the weight of fatigue. One morning, Jayden arrived at breakfast to find Evelyn absent. Clara, standing by the window, looked up as he entered. Her face was unusually solemn. "She's resting today," Clara explained. "The doctor recommended she stay in bed." Jayden frowned, his stomach knotting. "Is it serious?" Clara hesitated, then said, "Evelyn doesn't like to talk about it, but she doesn't have much time left. She wanted to keep going as long as she could, but the strain has been catching up with her." The gravity of her words hit Jayden hard. He excused himself and made his way to Evelyn's study, the room where they had shared so many discussions about the foundation. It felt eerily quiet without her presence, her cane resting by the desk like a silent reminder of her absence. Later that evening, Clara found him in the library, still staring at reports he had no energy to read. "She wants to see you," Clara said softly. Jayden made his way to Evelyn's bedroom, his heart heavy with unspoken fears. When he entered, he found her sitting up in bed, propped against a pile of pillows. She looked smaller, more fragile than he'd ever seen her, but her eyes were as piercing as ever. "Come in, Jayden," she said, her voice softer but steady. He sat beside her, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "Clara said you weren't feeling well. Are you?" Evelyn waved a hand, cutting him off. "Don't waste your energy worrying about me. I've lived a full life, and I've made my peace with what's coming." Jayden swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm not ready for this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn reached out and placed a hand over his. "No one is ever ready, Jayden, but I didn't choose you because I thought you'd be perfect. I chose you because I knew you'd keep going, even when it felt impossible. That's all that matters." She gestured to a drawer in the bedside table. "There's a letter in there. It's for you. Read it when you're ready." Jayden nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The next morning, Clara knocked on Jayden's door. Her expression told him everything before she said a word. "She passed peacefully in her sleep," Clara said softly. Jayden sat down, the weight of her absence hitting him like a physical blow. Evelyn Walker, the woman who had believed in him more than anyone else ever had, was gone. He found the letter where she had said it would be. With trembling hands, he opened it. "Jayden, if you're reading this, it means my time has come. But don't let grief hold you back. There's too much work to be done. You are stronger than you realize, and I have no doubt that you are the right person to carry this foundation forward. The safe in my study holds everything you'll need to know: my journals, project files, and plans for the future. But remember, the heart of this work isn't in those documents. It's in the people. Never forget who we're doing this for. You will face doubt, resistance, and setbacks. But you've already proven that you have the strength to persevere. Trust yourself, Jayden, and trust the mission. Carry this forward, not out of obligation, but because you believe in what we're building. I know you can do this. I believe in you." With gratitude, Evelyn tears blurred Jayden's vision as he read her words. He clutched the letter to his chest, the enormity of the responsibility she had entrusted to him sinking in. That afternoon, he opened the safe in her study. Inside were the journals she had meticulously kept over the years, detailing her thoughts, struggles, and triumphs. There were folders full of notes, contacts, and budgets, each one a testament to her unwavering commitment to the Foundation's mission. Jayden spent hours reading through her journals, her voice echoing in his mind with every word. One line stood out. "Legacy isn't about wealth or power. It's about the lives we touch along the way. That's what matters most." The next morning, Jayden gathered the Foundation staff for a meeting. They were somber, their expressions heavy with the loss of Evelyn. Jayden stood at the head of the table, the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. "I know none of us were ready to lose Evelyn," Jayden began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "She was more than a leader. She was a force of nature, but she believed in this team and in what we're building together. She believed in all of you, and she believed in me. He paused, meeting their gazes. I won't pretend to be Evelyn. I'm not here to replace her. But I am here to continue her work, to honor her legacy by pushing forward, no matter how difficult it gets. The staff nodded, their expressions shifting from grief to determination. After the meeting, Jayden returned to Evelyn's study, where the journal still lay open on the desk. He placed her letter beside it and sat down, his hands resting on the polished wood. Evelyn was gone, but her faith in him remained. And for the first time, Jayden began to believe that he could live up to it. The conference room buzzed with murmurs as the Foundation's board members gathered around the polished mahogany table. Jayden Williams sat at the head, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. It had been just 2 weeks since Evelyn's passing, and this was the first full board meeting under his leadership. Around the table, familiar faces, most of whom Jayden had met during Evelyn's tenure, wore expressions that ranged from cautious curiosity to outright skepticism. At the far end of the table sat Robert Hayes, the senior board member. His sharp suit and steely gaze made him the picture of authority, but it was his words that often carried the sharpest edge. Let's get to it, Hayes said, his voice cutting through the chatter. Mr. Carter, this is your meeting. The floor is yours. Jayden nodded, swallowing hard as he stood. He glanced at the notes in front of him, then set them aside. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, and thank you all for being here. I know this transition hasn't been easy for any of us. Evelyn's loss is something we're all still grappling with. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Jayden continued, his tone steady but firm. But she left us with a mission. This foundation isn't about any one person. It's about the lives we're changing, the communities we're uplifting. My goal is to ensure that her vision continues to thrive and evolve. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral but his tone laced with doubt. And how exactly do you plan to do that, Mr. Carter? With all due respect, you're new to this world. You lack the experience Evelyn had, and frankly, some of us are concerned about whether you're equipped to lead. The room fell silent, all eyes on Jayden. The knot in his stomach tightened, but he forced himself to hold Hayes' gaze. I understand your concerns, Jayden said evenly. I'm not Evelyn, and I don't claim to be. But I know what this foundation stands for, and I believe in its mission. I've been meeting with department heads, visiting our projects, and listening to the people we serve. I may not have decades of experience, but I do have the determination to carry this work forward. Linda Grayson, another senior board member, crossed her arms. Determination is admirable, Mr. Carter, but this isn't just about passion. Running an organization of this scale requires strategic planning, fundraising, and leadership skills. How do you plan to address those gaps? Jayden took a deep breath, steeling himself. I've been working closely with our staff to develop a plan for the next year. I've outlined specific goals for expanding our programs and increasing donor engagement, which you'll find in the packets I've provided. He gestured to the folders in front of each board member. These documents detail my immediate priorities: increasing funding for the vocational training programs, expanding our healthcare initiatives, and improving transparency with our stakeholders. I'm not asking for blind trust. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that I can deliver results. The board members began flipping through the folders, their expressions shifting from skepticism to cautious interest. Hayes, however, wasn't so easily swayed. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone sharp, Evelyn left you in charge because she believed in you. But belief doesn't guarantee success. What happens if you fail? What's your plan for that? Jayden felt a surge of frustration but kept his composure. Failure is always a possibility, Mr. Hayes, but I won't let fear of failure stop me from trying. Evelyn faced her own share of setbacks when she started this foundation, but she didn't let them define her. She adapted, she learned, and she kept moving forward. That's exactly what I intend to do. Linda leaned forward, studying Jayden intently. You talk about learning and adapting. What's one thing you've learned since stepping into this role? Jayden paused, considering her question. I've learned that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about listening, collaborating, and being willing to step outside of your comfort zone. I've seen the impact this foundation has on people's lives, and that's what drives me to keep pushing forward, even when it's hard. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words settling over the table. Finally, Linda nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Fair enough. Hayes, however, still looked unconvinced. We'll see if your actions match your words, he said curtly. For now, you have my tentative support. But understand this, Mr. Carter. This isn't a trial run. Lives depend on this foundation's success, and failure is not an option. I understand, Jayden said, meeting Hayes' gaze, and I won't let you, or the people we serve, down. The meeting continued with updates from department heads, but the tension in the room lingered. Jayden knew he had a long way to go to win the board's full confidence, but he also felt a spark of determination growing within him. Over the next several weeks, Jayden worked tirelessly to follow through on the plans he had presented. He visited more projects, meeting with staff and beneficiaries to better understand their needs. He held regular meetings with the board, providing updates on progress and seeking their input on key decisions. At the Vocational Training Center, Jayden met a young woman named Tasha who had recently completed a course in computer programming. This program changed my life, Tasha told him, her voice filled with emotion. I went from working dead-end jobs to getting an internship at a tech company. Now I can support my family in a way I never thought possible. Her words stayed with Jayden, reminding him why this work mattered. At the same time, Jayden faced resistance from external donors who questioned his ability to lead. At a fundraising gala, one donor approached him with a pointed question. You've got big shoes to fill, the man said, swirling his glass of wine. Evelyn was a visionary. Do you really think you can live up to her legacy? Jayden smiled politely, though the question stung. Evelyn's legacy isn't about me. It's about the people we serve. My job isn't to replace her. It's to ensure her vision continues to thrive. The donor raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Well, good luck with that. Moments like these were difficult, but Jayden refused to let them derail him. He poured his energy into building relationships with staff, donors, and board members, slowly earning their trust and respect. By the end of the quarter, the foundation's projects were thriving, and donor contributions were steadily increasing. At a board meeting, Linda Grayson offered him a rare compliment. You've proven me wrong, Jayden, she said with a smile. I wasn't sure you had what it took, but you've shown real leadership. Keep it up. Jayden nodded, a sense of pride washing over him. Thank you, Linda. That means a lot. Later that evening, Jayden stood on the balcony of the estate, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The grand opening of the Mentorship Initiative was unlike any event Jayden had attended before. The community center, recently renovated with funds from the foundation, was abuzz with excitement. Banners hung proudly above the entrance, and the scent of freshly cooked food filled the air. Inside, families, students, mentors, and local officials mingled, their conversations punctuated with laughter and anticipation. Jayden stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd. Despite the growing confidence he'd developed in recent months, he still felt the familiar knot of nerves tighten in his stomach. This was his first solo initiative since taking over the foundation, an idea he had pitched himself. The mentorship program was simple in concept, but ambitious in scale. Pairing young people from underserved communities with experienced professionals, it aimed to provide guidance, inspiration, and tangible career opportunities. The program was designed to break cycles of poverty by creating direct pathways to success, something Jayden had wished for in his own life. Big turnout, Clara said as she approached him, clipboard in hand. Jayden nodded. Bigger than I expected. That's a good sign, right? Clara smiled. It's a great sign. You've done well, Jayden. Evelyn would be proud. Her words settled over him like a warm blanket. He straightened his tie and exhaled slowly. Let's hope it all goes as planned. The crowd began to gather near the stage set up in the center's main hall. Jayden stepped forward as Linda Grayson, who had been instrumental in the program's early planning stages, introduced him. And now, Linda said, her voice ringing clear over the microphone, I'd like to welcome the driving force behind this program, Jayden Williams. The audience broke into applause, and Jayden made his way to the podium. He gripped its edges tightly, his heart pounding. For a moment, he glanced at the faces before him. Students who had been selected for the program, parents who had pinned their hopes on this initiative, and mentors eager to make a difference. Thank you, Linda, Jayden began, his voice steady. And thank you to everyone here today. This mentorship initiative is about more than just guidance. It's about opportunity. It's about creating a bridge between potential and possibility. He paused, letting the words sink in. I grew up in a family that struggled to make ends meet, Jayden continued. There were times when it felt like no matter how hard we worked, the system was stacked against us. What I needed most back then wasn't just money, it was someone who could show me the way forward. Someone who believed in me, even when I doubted myself. Jayden glanced at a young boy sitting in the front row, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. That's what this program is about. It's about giving young people the guidance, support, and belief they need to overcome obstacles and achieve their dreams. The applause that followed was loud and heartfelt, and Jayden felt a surge of pride. As he stepped back from the podium, a young woman named Tasha, one of the program's first mentees, took the stage. Tasha spoke about how the Foundation's vocational training program had changed her life, leading her to an internship at a tech company and eventually inspiring her to become a mentor herself. This program is proof that when people invest in others, amazing things happen, Tasha said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. I'm here today because someone believed in me. Now it's my turn to give back. Her words earned a standing ovation, and Jayden couldn't help but feel a swell of hope. After the speeches, Jayden mingled with attendees, shaking hands and listening to their stories. A young man approached him, his posture hesitant, but his eyes determined. Mr. Carter, the man said, extending a hand, I just wanted to say thank you. This program means everything to me. I've been trying to figure out my next steps, and now I feel like I finally have a chance. Jayden shook his hand firmly. I'm glad to hear that. You've got this. Just don't give up, no matter how hard it gets. The young man nodded, his expression brightening. As the event wound down, Jayden found a quiet moment to step outside. The evening air was cool and crisp, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. He leaned against the railing, letting the hum of voices and music drift out behind him. Clara appeared at his side, her ever-present clipboard tucked under her arm. You pulled it off, she said with a small smile. Barely, Jayden replied with a chuckle. But I'll take it. Clara tilted her head, her expression softening. You know, you've come a long way since you first stepped into this role. I think Evelyn would be proud of what you've accomplished. Jayden nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I hope so, but there's still so much to do. There always will be, Clara said. The conference room hummed with quiet tension as the board of directors convened for their quarterly review. Jayden Williams sat at the head of the table, his fingers loosely clasped in front of him. Over the months, he had become more accustomed to this role, but today's meeting carried higher stakes. This was the first review of the mentorship initiative and other recent projects under his leadership. The board members filed in, greeting each other with nods and polite smiles. Robert Hayes, the most vocal skeptic among them, took his usual seat near the center of the table. His sharp gaze met Jayden, and while his expression was unreadable, the weight of his scrutiny was palpable. Let's begin, Hayes said, leaning back in his chair. Mr. Carter, the floor is yours. Jayden took a deep breath and stood, gathering the confidence he had built over months of hard work. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Good morning, everyone. Before we dive into specifics, I want to thank you all for your support during this transition. None of this would have been possible without your contributions. He clicked a button on the small remote in his hand, and a projector screen illuminated with graphs, charts, and images. Today, I'll be sharing updates on our latest initiatives, including the mentorship program, expanded vocational training, and our healthcare outreach efforts. As Jayden spoke, his confidence grew. He detailed the mentorship program's early successes. 150 mentees matched with professionals, 80% of whom had already reported significant progress in their career or educational goals. He highlighted stories of individuals whose lives had been transformed, like Tasha, who had gone from mentee to mentor, inspiring others in her community. Next, Jayden shifted to the vocational training program, showcasing its 20% increase in enrollment and its partnerships with local businesses to place graduates in sustainable jobs. Finally, he touched on healthcare outreach, revealing partnerships with clinics that had expanded access to free medical care in underserved neighborhoods. These efforts have resulted in a 35% increase in patient visits and a 50% reduction in preventable emergency room trips, he explained, his tone steady and authoritative. The room remained quiet as Jayden paused, giving the board members time to digest the information. Linda Grayson was the first to speak. I have to admit, Jayden, those numbers are impressive, she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise. You've clearly put a lot of thought and effort into these initiatives. Jayden inclined his head. Thank you, Linda. It's been a team effort, and I'm grateful for the staff's dedication to making these programs successful. But not everyone in the room was as quick to offer praise. Robert Hayes leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. The results are promising, yes, he said, but programs like these require consistent funding and long-term planning. How do you intend to ensure sustainability? Donor engagement has been steady, but we haven't seen significant growth in contributions under your leadership. Jayden nodded, prepared for the question. That's a valid concern, Mr. Hayes. We've already started addressing it by diversifying our fundraising efforts. For example, we've launched a digital campaign to reach younger donors and partnered with local businesses to sponsor community events. Additionally, I've been in talks with a few corporate donors to secure multi-year funding commitments. Hayes arched an eyebrow but said nothing. Jayden took a step closer to the table, his tone growing more earnest. I know I still have a lot to prove, but I want to assure you all that I'm fully committed to this role. I understand that maintaining Evelyn's legacy is no small task, and I don't take it lightly. But I also believe that we can build on what she started, together. The board exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of contemplation and cautious approval. I'd like to hear more about those corporate partnerships, Linda said. If you can secure multi-year funding, that would address a lot of concerns about sustainability. I'd be happy to share details after the meeting, Jayden replied. For the next hour, the discussion shifted to operational updates and logistical concerns. Jayden fielded each question with a steady demeanor, referencing the data and stories he had carefully prepared. By the time the meeting concluded, the atmosphere in the room had softened noticeably. As the board members began to leave, Hayes lingered behind. He approached Jayden, his expression unreadable. You handled yourself well today, Hayes said after a pause. Thank you, Jayden replied, unsure of whether it was a compliment or a prelude to criticism. Hayes nodded slowly. Evelyn saw something in you. I'll admit, I wasn't convinced at first, but you're proving her right. Jayden blinked, taken aback. That means a lot, Mr. Hayes. Thank you. Keep it up, Hayes said, his tone firm. This foundation is too important for anything less. As Hayes walked away, Jayden let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The encounter, though brief, felt like a small victory. That evening, Jayden sat in Evelyn's study, a cup of coffee growing cold on the desk beside him. The day's events played over in his mind, the cautious approval from the board giving him a sense of validation he hadn't felt in months. He opened Evelyn's journal, flipping to a page he had marked weeks earlier. Her words seemed to resonate even more deeply now. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing when to listen, when to act, and when to trust the people around you. It's about holding the door open for others to step through. Jayden leaned back in the chair, his gaze drifting to the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the countless lives the Foundation's work touched. He thought about the mentorship program and the young people who were beginning to see new possibilities for their futures. He thought about the vocational training graduates starting new careers and the patients receiving care they couldn't have afforded otherwise. For the first time, Jayden felt a sense of belonging, not just to Evelyn's legacy, but to the mission she had entrusted him with. The road ahead would be long, and there were still battles to fight. But tonight, Jayden allowed himself to feel the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was making a difference. He closed the journal, a faint smile playing on his lips. Evelyn's faith in him had been the catalyst for everything, and now it was his turn to carry that faith forward. As the night deepened, Jayden sat in the study, sketching out plans for the Foundation's next steps. His confidence grew with each line he wrote, fueled by the belief that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The work wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but for the first time, Jayden felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Months had passed since Jayden Williams had taken on the leadership of Evelyn Walker's foundation. The initial hurdles, the doubts, and the whispered criticisms had slowly been replaced by respect and a growing belief in his capabilities. Yet even with the progress made, Jayden often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. One sunny afternoon, Jayden found himself back at the community center where the mentorship initiative had first launched. The event today was a celebration, a recognition of the program's first wave of graduates and their achievements. The hall was filled with energy and excitement. Young mentees stood alongside their mentors, beaming with pride as they shared their stories with the crowd. Parents mingled with program organizers, their faces filled with gratitude. Jayden lingered near the back, observing the scene. He preferred to let the spotlight shine on the mentees and their mentors today, but Clara nudged him forward. "They're waiting for you," she said with a knowing smile. Reluctantly, Jayden stepped onto the small stage set up at the front of the room. As the applause quieted, he adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "Today isn't about the foundation or about me. It's about all of you. The mentees who've worked tirelessly to pursue your dreams, and the mentors who've dedicated their time and energy to guiding the next generation." He glanced at a young woman in the front row. She wore a bright yellow blouse and clutched a certificate of completion. Jayden had heard her story earlier, how she had been the first in her family to graduate high school and now had dreams of becoming a teacher. "You are the reason we do this work," Jayden said, gesturing toward her and the other mentees. "Your resilience, your determination, and your hope for a better future remind us why this foundation exists." Evelyn Walker believed in building opportunities for those who had been overlooked, and today I see her vision reflected in each of you. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Jayden felt a lump rise in his throat. He stepped back from the microphone, allowing the event's MC to take over. Later that evening, Jayden returned to the estate. The house was quieter than usual, the staff having retired for the night. He wandered into Evelyn's study, a place he now considered his own, though he still felt her presence in every corner of the room. On the desk sat a box labeled Evelyn's personal letters. It had been left untouched since her passing, but tonight Jayden felt compelled to open it. Inside were dozens of envelopes, most of them addressed to friends, colleagues, and family. But one letter marked with his name caught his eye. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. "Jayden, if you're reading this, it means you've taken the reins of the foundation and are well on your way to carving your own path. I knew you'd get here, but I also know it hasn't been easy. Leadership never is. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when the challenges feel insurmountable. But I want you to remember this. The work you're doing is bigger than any one person. It's about the people who rely on us to see their potential, even when the world doesn't. You have already made me proud, Jayden. Not because you're perfect, but because you've embraced the responsibility with an open heart. Keep going. Keep believing. And when you feel lost, look to the people you've helped. They are your compass." With gratitude and faith, Evelyn Jayden folded the letter carefully, his chest tight with emotion. He placed it back in the box, but its message lingered in his mind. Evelyn's words weren't just encouragement. They were a reminder of the trust she had placed in him. The following week, Jayden gathered the foundation staff in the estate's conference room for an important announcement. The team had grown closer over the months, and while there were still moments of tension and disagreement, Jayden could see the beginnings of a shared sense of purpose. "I wanted to thank all of you for your hard work," Jayden began, addressing the group. "What we've accomplished in these past few months has been incredible, but I know Evelyn would want us to push even further." He clicked a remote, and a presentation lit up the projector screen. "Today, I'm introducing a new initiative, the Legacy Program. It's designed to expand our mentorship model into new areas, including entrepreneurship and technical training. We'll also be increasing our healthcare outreach efforts, focusing on mental health resources in underserved communities." The room buzzed with excitement as Jayden outlined the plans. He fielded questions, took notes, and listened intently to suggestions from his team. By the end of the meeting, Jayden felt a renewed sense of confidence. He wasn't just carrying Evelyn's legacy, he was building his own. That evening, Jayden found himself back at the community center, this time in the quiet of its library. He sat at one of the tables, flipping through reports and brainstorming new ideas. A young boy approached him, clutching a book. "Mr. Carter." Jayden looked up and smiled. "What's up, buddy?" "Are you the guy who helped build this place?" the boy asked, his voice filled with awe. Jayden chuckled softly. "I'm part of the team that helped, but there were a lot of people who made it happen." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "I want to help people too, like you." Jayden felt a surge of emotion. "You can," he said, "and you'll do it in your own way. Just don't stop dreaming, okay?" The boy grinned and ran off, leaving Jayden alone with his thoughts. In that moment, Jayden realized how far he had come, from a young man barely scraping by to a leader carrying forward a vision that was changing lives. Evelyn's legacy had set him on this path, but it was the people he served who gave him the strength to keep moving forward. As he stepped outside into the crisp night air, Jayden looked up at the stars. The road ahead would still be full of challenges, but he felt ready to face them. Evelyn's faith in him had been the catalyst, but it was his own belief in the mission that would sustain him. Together with the Foundation's team and the communities they served, Jayden was determined to build a future defined by hope, justice, and opportunity.